For all the ADC players out there, we at SkillCapped figured we should make a comprehensive macro guide for everything you need to know to get started on Season 12. We'll be talking about early and mid-game macro, objectives, and what to do when your teammates have no idea what their job should be, so you can carry them anyway. Let's jump right into things. Starting with the lane phase. The first thing most ADC players will tell you is that you don't have much agency over how things go in the early game. This isn't entirely wrong, but that doesn't mean that you have literally zero control over how things go in the laning phase. Imagine for a moment that we put a world-class ADC in a gold elo game. Do you think they'd have zero impact over how the early game went? Of course not. They'd completely dominate their lane almost every single match. The reason for that is simple. Most ADC players focus on the wrong things. Yes, you can't necessarily make any big plays yourself, but you can definitely enable your own teammates and/or counter any plays that your opponents are trying to make. Remember that almost every play during that laning phase is generally based around the minion waves that both sides are constantly fighting over. In any lane, be it top, mid, or bottom, your goal with the wave is usually to set up the minion wave in a way that either allows you to punish your opponent as they try to farm, or to make it easier for yourself to farm as you try to scale up. In mid and top, yes, the laners have the agency to use their own wave manipulation tactics to their advantage. If you build up a slow push in top lane, get a level and health lead, then you can reliably tower dive your opponent for a free kill without requiring anyone else's help. Sadly, as an ADC, you're much more reliant on your teammates, but your goal in the lane phase should still be to use wave control to properly punish your opponents. Although you may not be the one to set up the eventual punish, you're still the one that made it happen in the first place. Here, let's show you an example of what we mean. During this game, Quinn decides to leash the wave at level 1. If you understand the even minion rule, then you'll know that because this wave is closer to the enemy's side of the lane, that it's guaranteed to push toward Quinn eventually as a slow push. Quinn's goal was to set up a freeze onto the vulnerable enemy bot lane, which would allow her Hecarim to come in for a gank later on. That's precisely what happened, and due to their stronger 3v3 composition, they come out ahead and crush the enemy team in this ensuing skirmish. Although this wasn't specifically Quinn that made this happen, let's hear what the players' real-time thoughts on the issue were.
But yeah, there's also the idea that if Hecarim starts topside, leashing the wave just sets up ganks like that, right? Not that that was my main goal, but in case it happened, it's nice.
As you could hear, this wasn't some premeditated guaranteed outcome. His goal was simply to put the wave in a favorable position for Hecarim, and if he happened to gank, then good, and if not, whatever. Let's take a look at another example.
Actually, we're just gonna stay and see what happens. I think they're gonna hard push this. So the reason why we're staying here is because 600 gold, like, I'd be sitting and waiting for a longsword and boots of speed. But since I'm staying here, I can now force them to push this wave out and then hold the freeze. So pretty much we're going to set our own good lane state, so now they're going to have to shove it in.
By keeping the wave frozen, this forced the enemy duo to overstay their welcome. Once Nautilus comes back into lane, he punishes the Thresh for walking too far forward and they kill him together. Again, this wasn't Jin's doing, but the play even being possible in the first place was all because of his wave control. Your goal as an ADC during the laning phase is to think of your control over the game in terms of percentages. For example, imagine a lane with two supports who both want to land a skill shot. If you're constantly in control of the wave, then the likelihood that your support lands their impactful spell before the enemy is much higher. Yes, it's not guaranteed to happen, but enabling your teammates through proper wave control is what every good AD player does, and should be the most important thing you focus on during the lane phase. And those kinds of wave tactics are stuff we cover in our guides all the time on SkillCapped, so if you're a veteran viewer, this should come as no surprise to you. Moving on to the mid and late game, ADC macro is actually pretty simple. After lane phase ends, you generally want to run around taking outer towers if you're capable of doing so. After you've broken all enemy side lane outer towers, or if you're behind and you couldn't do so, then you'll finally end up settling in mid. Let's break down all the reasons why this is the case, because you can't know how to appropriately adapt to unusual circumstances if you don't understand why you should end up in mid in the first place. First, it's the safest lane to be in by far. Most of your team's vision will generally be around mid. It's also the shortest lane and the area where most of your teammates will usually hover around. Marksmen are typically the most vulnerable role in the game. It makes sense to keep them in mid so that they can farm safely and scale. Due to how vulnerable you typically are, this also means that supports usually have to stick around you to keep you safe. Well, you being in mid works out really well for your support too, since that's also where they want to be. By being mid, they have easier access to placing vision in the highest traffic area in the game, and they're also able to rotate to any fight that happens on the map to influence it. The second reason that you should be mid is that your role as an ADC in most games is to deal the most damage out of everyone in team fights. By being right in the middle of the map, you have the best access to any fight that may happen around an objective or randomly in the jungle. This is the basics of mid-game macro for an ADC, and really easy to follow. As we're sure you know, this is what should happen, not what actually ends up transpiring. Mid-game macro, especially in lower elos, is a complete mess. People tend to sit together, sharing farm, not pushing out side lanes, taking random fights, etc, etc. Like we said, understanding what is usually ideal will help you to learn how to adapt in your games. This will sound silly, but a good way of learning how to adapt properly is the following mindset. If other players are playing wrong, then you also need to play incorrectly to make up for their mistakes. Don't get too tunnel visioned on always doing the right thing. Oftentimes, especially as an ADC, doing the unorthodox and adapting to weird circumstances will help you climb much faster. And to do that, you need to learn about the 3 macro zones of the side lane. They're the collection, neutral, and pressure zones. These zones represent in which area of the map the side lane minion waves have collided and how safe it is to farm them. Starting with the collection zone, which is the safest, this is the one right between your inhibitor and outer towers. This area is pretty safe to farm waves in, since it's adjacent to your own team's jungle and very close to your base. Generally, it's very unlikely that you run into any trouble if you try to farm here. Next, in between both outer towers is the neutral zone. This is right in the middle of both side lanes. It's not super dangerous to be farming waves here, but you're quite a bit more likely to find trouble waiting here than you would in the collection zone. Finally, there's the pressure zone. This is where champions like Tryndamere thrive. The goal is to push minion waves onto the enemy's side of the map to pressure towers and force a response from your opponent. Of course, this is by far the most dangerous area of the side lane, since it's deep into the enemy's side of the map, and that makes it quite easy for your opponents to collapse onto you and kill you. That's why usually only great split pushers with a lot of mobility and dueling potential do well in this zone. And it should go without saying that these zones are obviously reversed from your opponent's perspective. When you push waves into the pressure zone, it's in their collection zone, and they should go farm those waves, and so on. In a perfect world, while you're in mid lane, your solo laner should be in both side lanes in the specific zone that their champions usually interact with. For example, your Fiora is usually deep into the pressure zone, pushing waves into enemy towers and looking to duel anyone who comes to defend. Or your Orianna is catching bot waves around the collection and neutral zones, and once that's done, she rotates back to mid to group for a moment, while the wave is now in the pressure zone she can't easily access. Again, these are just some examples of what might be happening if everyone is playing correctly. Like we said though, that's not at all what happens, especially in the lower elo brackets. The Aram of Summoner's Rift is a running joke for this exact reason. Players tend to gravitate towards mid to sit there and share a single minion wave worth of gold and experience all the time. As an ADC, you can't have that. While your teammates are able to pick up more kills than you in most games, as a marksman, most of your gold will usually come from minions and towers since you're able to farm faster relative to most other champions. Therefore, sharing waves is really, really bad for you. So what does this mean? Simple. You just do your teammates' jobs for them. As an ADC, although you're not a very safe archetype in the side lane, you can still go to it and do your teammates' job for them when they refuse to do so. For example, this Jinx's Annie refuses to ever leave mid. This is forcing Jinx to share her CS with Annie more than she would like. So Jinx needs to take action so she doesn't fall behind in farm. Something you should be doing is taking jungle camps that your jungler isn't near. You typically won't get flamed for taking them if your jungler isn't close to the area. After taking Gromp, Jinx notices the enemy Kai'Sa pushing out the bot wave. So she patiently waits and allows the wave to get to the collection zone where she can safely farm it. Afterwards, she moves to regroup with her team. This is literally what we talked about earlier, that your mid laners should be doing. But if they're not doing it, then you can just pick up their slack. See how easy macro is? If you understand the basics, then adapting to what your teammates are doing wrong takes no effort at all. The only hard part is the following. Most ADCs are really scared of going further than the collection and neutral zones, and that's understandable. Being so squishy and vulnerable, you'll often just end up dying if you try to push a side lane too aggressively. But that mentality can severely limit just how much impact you can actually have in your games through macro. So just like before, let's actually talk about what makes a good split pusher. Why are champions like Jax or Fiora able to do what they do? There's two things that make a good split pusher. One, they can outduel one or multiple people who collapse to try and kill them in a side lane. Split pushers who can do this are champions like Aurelia or Alawi. The second thing that makes a good split pusher is the ability to make an easy getaway if the enemy team tries to group up and kill them. Singed or Rise with his ultimate are good examples of this. It's very hard to lock them down when they're in a side lane. Then, of course, there are the notorious split pushers everyone hates, like Tryndamere, Riven, or Fiora, who can either get away or kill whoever comes. So here's the point. Yes, it will be far less common, but if you're able to do either of those things as an ADC in your game, then you can obviously split push too if you want to. Let's show you what we mean. During this game, Miss Fortune felt pretty confident in her ability to split push this moment. She had good vision in the enemy jungle and had a vague idea of where everyone on the enemy team was, so she decides to take the top inner tower. After taking the tower, she even commits to farming a final wave before making her getaway, and she just walks away from the Olaf without any problems. That looked really easy because Miss Fortune was aware of the weakness of the enemy top laner. Olaf, the champion most likely to respond to her split, can definitely kill her. He's really fed and a powerful duelist, but his only way of catching people is by running at them. Miss Fortune is a really fast champion with a slow. Although she can't fight Olaf, it doesn't matter if he can never catch her. Being adaptable and understanding what your opponents can and can't do will allow you to pull off macro plays like that one. Here's a question though, if that Olaf were a Nocturne instead, could Miss Fortune have done the same thing? Of course not. She has no summoners up and the Nocturne could easily get on top of her with his ultimate. In that kind of game as Miss Fortune, you just wouldn't go past the collection zone very often. Another type of play you can make in a side lane is one of the most impactful things you can do. Earlier during the same game, Miss Fortune was pushing aggressively in the pressure zone. She knew where most of the enemy team was and felt safe doing so. As we said before, your pressure zone is your opponent's collection zone. They usually have to respond to the waves being pushed into their towers. In this case, Miss Fortune's opponents were uncoordinated and sent two people to deal with her push. This is a massive advantage. While Vayne and Karthus were stuck clearing waves in bottom, Miss Fortune crossed the enemy jungle to flank the enemy team, knowing she and her own allies have a guaranteed numbers advantage. Her play pays off and they score an easy kill on the isolated Blitzcrank. Pushing out a side lane aggressively and flanking with a numbers advantage is a tactic usually reserved for assassins or traditional split pushers, but there's no rule that says you can't do it either as an ADC. Why would you not use one of the strongest macro tactics in the game? Just because you're not supposed to? That's so limiting to your growth as a player. If you have vision and you're capable of pushing aggressively without fear of dying, then you can do this just as easily as any other role. Lastly, you should always remember one of the most important characteristics of a good side laner, their ability to duel people. Luckily for you, ADCs have access to some of the best duelists in the game, such as Kai'Sa, Vayne, or Lucian. Yes, the ADC and current year gag is something we've heard a million times, but ADCs can actually duel very well in a lot of cases, depending on who they're up against and what their builds are. For example, during this game, Kai'Sa was very fed and felt quite comfortable to be in the pressure zone most of the time, pushing waves, taking the enemy jungle, and pushing towers. As she's pushing, she notices a dragon fight that's about to erupt. She decides not to go. This may seem a little weird, but basically by pushing so aggressively, she's hoping the enemy team sends people to stop her from taking their base. By doing so, her team wouldn't be at a numbers disadvantage even if she didn't go to the fight. That way, they're still able to claim dragon. Is this the 100% correct play? That's debatable and not the point here at all. You're never going to make the best choice in every single scenario. This is just what her game plan was, so let's see what actually happens. As the fight at Dragon rages on, the enemy Mundo realizes he needs to defend his base and moves over to duel Kai'Sa. Like we said though, Kai'Sa is a fantastic dueling marksman. The fight wasn't even close with how fed she was, and she keeps steamrolling the enemy base. Again, this specific play doesn't matter. We just want to make it clear that if you're strong enough to duel people in a side lane, then don't be afraid to push and fight people on your own. You can absolutely dominate games by pushing your lead this way. Ultimately, in this guide, we just want you to not let preconceptions of what your role can and can't do prevent you from utilizing some of the best macro strategies in the game. We can't cover every single possible situation you'll ever find yourself in as an ADC. It's impossible. This game is just way too complex. But if you understand the simple concepts that go into most macro decisions, then you can more easily adapt to what's going on in your games, which should have you making better macro calls in no time.
So you might be asking yourself, why go to SkillCapped.com to improve when I could just watch YouTube guides or play the game? Well, let me show you. Let's say you're an AD carry who's struggling to climb the ladder. Not only would you get over 55 site exclusive courses for AD carry, but maybe really what you've been struggling with is wave control in bot lane. Well, we got you covered with 6 different courses breaking down wave control as an AD carry. Not only do we have the largest catalog of guides for League of Legends in the entire world with over 1,500 videos to watch, but these are then curated by the top coaches and players into courses on every skill and topic you need to master in order to truly improve and climb the ladder. If all of this wasn't enough, we haven't even touched on our catalog of over 700 Smurf commentaries, where a challenger expert shows you how to climb out of your rank, and you're guaranteed to get any questions answered by them directly. Not to mention, we're the only service to offer a rank improvement guarantee. If you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a refund, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Head to SkillCapped.com and get the rank you've always wanted. Link in the description below.
Alright guys, that's going to wrap up your macro guide for Season 12. We hope you meet your new ranked goals this season. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.